Today continue our webinars, and today we will talk about cardiotoxicity drugs, drug-inducing cardiotoxicity. It's a continuity part. We will continue clinical pharmacovigilance, and we will talk about cardiotoxicity drugs. Drug-induced cardiotoxicity, it's kind of cardiotoxicity like hepatotoxic, like kidney nephrotoxic, and cardiotoxicity. It's related with mechanism. We will talk about it today, mechanism of toxicity, and precisely concerning on cardiotoxicity. Let me introduce myself. My name is Galina Cordero. I am qualified person of pharmacovigilance, head of pharmacovigilance department, clinical expert, medical doctor, MD, DCK, pharmac scientific research background. What this means? Drug-induced cardiotoxicity. Cardiotoxicity, defined as toxicity that affects the heart, is one of the most common adverse drug effects. Numerous drugs have been shown to have the potential to induce lethal arrhythmias by affecting cardiac electrophysiology with the focus of current preclinical testing. However, a substantial number of drugs can also cardiac function affect beyond electrophysiology. Adverse effects of anti-cancer, central nervous system, genitourinary system, gastrointestinal, antihistaminic, anti-inflammatory, and anti-infective agents, illustrating that many share mechanisms of cardiotoxicity, including contractility, mitochondrial function, and cellular signaling. In the treatment of a variety of disease and disorders, the myocardium has frequently become a major site of toxicity for a host of drugs. In broad sense, in the myocytes level, the sites of drug action that can lead to an adverse reaction can be categorized into a number of specific locales. For example, cell membrane-bound receptors, second messenger system and associated enzymes, ionic channels, natrium, calcium, ion exchangers, ion pumps, intracellular organelles, mitochondria, sarcoplasmic reticulum, myofilaments, and DNA mRNA molecules are sites on which drugs can act and produce an adverse cardiac event. Interference at the level of neuronal input to the heart can present yet another site where adverse drug effects can manifest themselves. A relatively simple scenario is that drugs can interfere with cardiac function with the modification of an activities of an ionic channel, either at a plasma membrane of intracellular level, causing abnormal depolarization and or repolarization in the pacemaker cells, the conduction fibers, and the contractile cells, and hence the precipitate and disruption and the rhythm, and causing dysfunction in the contraction and or relaxation of myositis. Persistent and significant disruption in the process of contraction relaxation will eventually lead to inadequate perfusion of blood vital organs, brain, heart, lungs, kidney, liver, ultimately leading to death. It is now recognized that the toxic action of drugs to the myocardium are not exclusive to anti-tumor and also called cardiac drugs, and that many others. Drugs with diverse chemical structures such as antimicrobials, antimalarials, antihistamines, psychiatric, and gastrointestinal medication can profoundly disrupt myocardium function, with a time can be fatal too. Cardiotocity drugs, drug-induced cardiotoxicity, commonly in the form of cardiac muscle dysfunction that may progress to heart failure, represent a major adverse effect of some common traditional anti-neoplastic agents. It can be anthracyclines, cyclophosphamide, 5-fluorouracil, new agent taxanes as well, such as biological monoclonal antibodies, trastuzumab, bevacizumab, and nivolumab. Tyrosine kinase inhibitors, sunitinib and niatinib, antiretroviral drugs is zivavudine, antidiabetics, roglitazone, as well as some drugs such as alcohol, cocaine, methamphetamine, ecstasy, and synthetic cannabinoids. Most of affected patients had no prior manifestation of the disease. Risk factors for the drug-induced cardiotoxicity include patient age at time of exposure below 4 years and old age, female gender, black ethnicity, class of chemotherapeutic agents, total cumulative dose, concomitant radiotherapy, cardiac irradiation, abnormal cardiac imaging or biomarker radiation, history of heart disease, of left ventricular dysfunction, obesity, diabetes, dyslipidemia, physical inactivity, smoking, genetic predisposition. Clinical symptoms of cardiotoxicity can be left ventricular failure, myocardial ischemia, QT prolongation, antiarrhythmias, pericarditis, myocarditis, hypertension, thromboembolism. Asymptomatic diastolic dysfunction, which is a common feature observed in many cancer survivors, has been shown to be the earliest noticeable cardiac abnormality. Mechanism of antitoxicity, and you see it in a slide. This can be in different typical pathological process. For example, it can be influenced on growth factor signaling, its vascular endothelial growth factors, epidermal growth factors, platelet-derived growth factors, tyrosine kinase inhibitors, and monoclonal antibodies influence on growth factor signaling. On contractility and NO signaling, NO synthesized signaling, it can be proton pump inhibitors, calcium cyclin, tyrosine kinase inhibitors, and tyrodelin. Electrophysiology can influence ion channel inhibition, CV agents, local anesthetics, antidepressants, antipsychotics, antibiotics. On ion channels trafficking can influence fluoxetine, HDAC inhibitors, bortezomib, cardiac glycosides, and antiviral medicines. Mitochondria functioning, fission cycling, influence anti-HIV therapies, antibiotics including anthracyclines, genomic stability, anti-HIV therapies, antibiotics, and energy productions, local anesthetics. On apoptosis process can influence antitubulins and anthracyclines. Fibrosis, antidiabetic drugs, CNS agents, central nervous system agents, and thrombosis, antimetabolites, and steroid anti-inflammatory drugs. Antibiotics and antiviral therapies can induce mitochondrial dysfunction, leading on impaired fission cycle. Local anesthetic increase mitochondrial permeability, affection function. Cardiotoxicity of tyrosine kinase inhibitors and monoclonal antibodies is primarily linked to inhibition of major signaling pathway for cardiomyocyte, survival, and maintenance. Different central nervous system and antidiabetic agents have been associated with emergence of cardiac fibrosis. Proton pump inhibitors can affect cardiac contractility via inhibition of NO synthesis. Similarly, tyrosine kinase inhibitors have been linked to calcium cycling dysregulation. Multiply-neural cardiovascular and anti-infective agents also have been shown to interact with cardiac electrophysiology. Cardiac adverse effects of fluoxetine, HDAse inhibitors, and bartizomib are primarily linked to affected ion channel trafficking rather than acute channel block. Overview of mechanisms of cardiotoxicity. You can see on this slide the abnormalities in action potential duration or conduction velocity associated with direct block of ionic currents of inhibition of their trafficking from nucleus to cell membrane. Multiply pathways can trigger apoptosis, including VEGFR or EGFR inhibition, cardiomyocyte survivor, PDGF inhibition, compensatory stress response, DR-inducing tumor necrotic factor signaling activation, mitochondrial damage, or elevated active radical levels, AIDR, VEGFR signaling, or NOS synthase inhibition affects calcium cycling. AMPK signaling inhibition affects for both the mitochondrial fusion-fission cycle and the production of ATP. Serotonin-induced activation of tumor growth factor beta pathway is primarily linked to cardiac fibrosis function, IKR, rapid dilated rectifier current, INA, inverse sodium current, INLEL, late inverse sodium current, ICAL, L-type calcium current, IIDR, alpha adrenergic receptor, VEGFR, vascular endothelial growth factor receptor, AGFR, epidermal growth factor receptor, DRSC-DES receptor, PDGF, platelet-derived growth factor, 5-HT2B, 5-hydroxytryptamine receptor, serotonin receptor 2B, tumor necrosis factor, tumor growth factor B, transforming growth factor beta, ROS, reactive oxygen species, CIMK2, calcium calmodulin dependent protein kinase 2, AMPK, AMP activated protein kinase, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Schematic of cardiogenesis, trafficking, degradation, and pathways of drug-induced deficiency, subcellular process modulated hierarchical expression of the cellular membrane. Schematics of cardiogenesis, trafficking, and degraded pathways of drug-inducing and KR deficiency, subcellular processes modulated hERG expression on the cellular membranes include mRNA synthesis of polypeptide chain, transport of polypeptide from endoplasmatic reticulum to Golgi apparatus with HCP70 and HCP90 chaperones attached, transport of the polypeptide in COP2 mediated vesicle, glycosylation, exocytosis, endocytosis, ubiquitination, and degradation of hERG. Cardiac toxicity of cardiac glycoside, for example, especially natrium plus kalium plus ATPase inhibitors, with known of prolongation risk, reduce hERG trafficking in HAQ293 lions and the Guinea speech ventricular cardiomyocytes. Incubation with digoxin, and cucumamine resulted in a significant reduction on mature hERG. Later evidence shows that digoxin-inducing hERG trafficking inhibition is a result of the low intracellular potassium concentration caused by natrium plus Kalium plus ATFase inhibition. Moreover, digoxin has been reported to generally enhance protein degradation through a lysosomal pathway. When we're talking about cardiac toxicity of lipid-lowering compounds, the lipid-lowering compounds propofol, for example, also causes of QT prolongation without a direct block of the hERG channels. This is believed to result from trafficking disruption, as shown in neonatal rate ventricular cardiomyocytes and later in HEK293 cells, in which enhancing degradation of mature hERG via nedylation was indicated as mechanism. Arsenic trioxide showed no effect of nedylation of hERG 113 gene expression inhibition and alteration of the acetylation of proteins involved in ion channel trafficking and degradation also have been proposed as possible cardiotoxic mechanism of high-stun deacetylase inhibitors. Cardiac toxic influence on contractility of myocardium. Depressing the contractility of heart rate is a mechanism of action of many cardiac drugs such as calcium channel blockers. This bind of L-type calcium channels and beta blockers that block beta adrenoreceptors. Cardiac glycosides, which inhibit the natrium plus calcium plus pump, can also depress heart rate despite their well-known positive inotropic effects. The safe administration of cardiac glycosides is regarded as a difficult task because of their narrow safety margins, and the most potent inotropic agents generally have the lowest toxic to therapeutic ratios. Doxaborotine inducing mitochondrial dysfunction, you can see it on slide, as the effect of trastuzumab as examples of mitochondrial related survivor pathways. Doxaborotine lead to marked induction of mitochondrial reactive oxygen species production. It shows specific binding activity to the mitochondrial abundant cardiolipin, leading to selective mitochondrial accumulation. Doxorubicin is prone to redox cycling, thereby promoting reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species production. There is also increased intramitochondrial free iron accumulation after doxorubicin exposition, giving rise to additional non-zemetic reactive oxygen species production by the Haber-West reaction. The major consequences of uncontrolled ROS RNase production are mitochondrial permeability, transition pore, MIRTP opening, and poly-ADP ribose polymerase activation, converging to prolongation to cell death signaling mechanism. In parallel with ROS RNase induction, doxorubicin also interferes with action of topoisomerase 2B, being involved in regulation on peroxisome proliferated activated receptor activator 1 alpha, release to interleukin 1 by the coronary endothelium activates human epidermal growth factor receptor. You see how long this difficult mechanism of doxorubicin inducing mitochondrial dysfunction. It's what we should know about that this process, there is process of cardiotoxicity. If summarize, for example, this slide with general mini-mitochondrial toxicity, several pharmaceutical agents have been found to produce or facilitate mitochondrial toxicity, including in the heart. These inimical drugs span multiple classes, including anthracyclines, antivirals, antidepressants, and local anesthetics. The mitochondrial toxicity of anthracyclines is primarily linked to the inhibition of their direct target, topoisomerase DNA 2 beta, required for mitochondrial DNA replication. Antiretroviral drugs often used to treat HIV directly target and inhibit reverse transcriptase. However, antiretrovirals have been found to also inhibit mitochondrial DNA polymerase gamma, depleted mitochondrial DNA, and disruption mitochondrial function. Anti-HIV therapies have also been shown to inhibit the mitochondrial fusion-fission cycle. Local anesthetics have been suggested to interact with phospholipids on the mitochondrial membrane, which often result in increasing membrane permeability, electron transport, chain disruption, and calcium accumulation. Growth factor and cytokine signaling AGF inhibitors such as elapatinib or trastuzumab have recently been linked to adverse cardiac effects. Activation of IMP-activated protein kinase, which controls cellular energy and survival homeostasis, is required for mitochondrial fission in response to stress, could underlie the relatively low toxicity rate on lapatinib, compared with the myocardial metabolism disruption associated IMK attenuation by other tyrosine kinase inhibitors. This problem is enough big and very actual because, as you know, because of cardiotoxicity, drugs were withdrawn, and you see that it was withdrawn agent but 27 areas, and it was an genito-unitary area therapeutic, anti-infective, anti-allergic, to gastrointestinal, cardiovascular was 8 drug withdrawn, and CNS, central nervous system, treated was because of cardiotoxicity were withdrawn 9 medicines. And when you see that what kind of this drug, yes, it was etoxib, enkinete, deflexaflumid, probacol, astemizole, levomethodyl acetate, terfenadine, tizaprid, phentermine, propoxyphene, sibutramine. It's drug for losing weight, and besides of cardiotoxicity, this medicine had rising arterial pressure and development of hypertension. Levorfloxacin, rofecoxib, certifinate, doxycytidine, mibitradil, sparfloxacin, tegaserol. Nervous system, it's 9 medicine. It's teradilline, lidaflazine, fenfluramine, butflomidil, chlorphentermine, benfluorex, orsifentamine, clobetanol, and prenvlamine. You see that this happened. These drugs were withdrawn from 1955 to 2010 years. When latest drug discontinuation due to cardiac disease, if we see time from 1997 to 2003 period, it was fenfluramine anorectic drug, terfenadine antihistamine drug 1998, sertindol antipsychotic 1998, astemizole antihistamine drugs 1999, grapafloxacin antibiotic 1999, tizaprid prokinetic 2000, droperidol tranquilizer 2001, and levometadil treatment of opioid dependence 2003. We will now discuss about withdrawn drugs because of toxicity. For example, artiprenaline withdrawn 2018. You see this drug was enough big time, I think a lot time, from 1965 to 2011. It was mechanism of action with targets activation of ADRB2, side effects of cardiac function, tachycardia, palpitation, mechanism of cardiac toxicity, activation of ADRB2. Prenilamine 1960-1988, blocking of MEYLK2 CALM, QT prolongation, sudden cardiac death, side effects of cardiac function, ventricular tachycardia, torsades. Torsades, if you remember, it can be fatal consequences and adverse events of treatment, and we will talk about antibiotics. Its macrolides has same torsades arrhythmia, can be fatal for patient. Probocul 1995-2009, inductor of LDL catabolism, side effects of cardiac function. Probocul is low lipid agents, and side effects of cardiac function can be QT prolongation, arrhythmias, mechanism of cardiac toxicity, HRG trafficking inhibition. Alagliptin 2013, inhibition of DPP4, head failure and mechanism still unknown. Clobutinol 1963-2007, inhibition of GABA, QT prolongation. Raglitazone, it's antidiabetic diabetic drugs, and with big hopeness, with big results of decreasing of level of glucose, but still because of development of heart failure with fatal with death is fatal. It was fatal for patient because of mechanism of action with targets activation of PRAG, and still mechanism cardiac toxicity was unknown. Saxagliptin 2009, inhibition DDP4, heart failures, and it's same mechanism of action with targets like alagliptin. Side effects of cardiac function is heart failures, and mechanism cardiac toxicity unknown. When we talk about specific cardiac toxicity, we cannot forget about cardiac toxicity of anti-cancer drugs, and it's we can talk about anthracyclines, doxorubicin, daunorubicin, epirubicin, idarubicin, and metoxantrone. you see that one of major mechanism mitochondrial dysfunction, and why it can be fatal, because in patients, in group of patients with mitochondrial deficiency, it can have fatal effect. You see that this group of drug anthracyclines influence on cardiomyocytes, on cells of heart, of myocardium, fibroblast, endothelial cells, and still on immune cells. It's like divided mechanism at 4 targets: cardiomyocytes, fibroblast, endothelial cells, and immune cells. When we're talking about influence on cardiomyocytes, we remember that it's influence on topoisomerase activity, cardiolipin sequestering, formation of free radicals and reactive species, oxidation, lipid peroxidation, alteration of iron homeostasis and accumulation, and these major mechanisms we talked about is mitochondrial dysfunction and can lead to DNA, protein, and lipid damage, and cardiomyocyte death and heart failure. Mitochondrial structure damage still it can cause it of heart failure. Another one mechanism can be cause of cardiac remodeling. It's influence on fibroblast, endothelial cells, immune cells, ingredients tumor growth factor B signaling mechanism. It can be cause of fibroblast activation and collagen deposition, increased endothelial permeability and edema formation, immune cell activation and inflammatory response, and yes, it can be cause of cardiac remodeling generally. If assume this mechanism, pathogenesis of heart failure and cardiac remodeling as can be fatal for patient, we can say that cellular and molecular mechanism of the cardiotoxic effects exerted by anthracyclines generally. A schematic diagram showing on this slide the impact of anthracyclines on a multitude of cardiomyocytes in intrinsic mechanism leading to mitochondrial dysfunction and structural damage and or DNA damage by topoisomerase activity, in turn leading to cardiomyocyte death and heart failure. Additional mechanisms of anthracycline-inducing cardiotoxicity include degeneration of fibroblast, endothelial immune cells, in turn concurrent to cardiac remodeling. Cardiotoxic effect of anthracyclines at cell we can see generally and in another slide. Its final cardiotoxic effect, intermediate effect, the primary mechanism. Finally, cardiotoxic effect can cause of cell dysfunction. Intermediate effect, nuclear and mitochondrial DNA damage, disruption of calcium homeostasis, bioenergetic failure, lipid peroxidation, disruption of iron homeostasis, and primary mechanism, inhibition of nuclear topoisomerase and oxidative stress as typical pathological processes. Effects of this process it can be as a mechanism in anthracycline therapy induces transmembrane receptors homoheterodimerization and its character for monoclonal antibody like cetuximab as exams, trastuzumab, and main effects of this pathological chain. It's development of proliferation through nucleus. It's going it's an NF-κB, FOS, GUN, MYC, and SP1. NF-κB is nuclear factor, and it's still can influence and on synthesize and can be caused endothelial dysfunction generally. As you see, this can be affect general proliferation, apoptosis, migration, invasion, metastasis, adhesion, and remodeling. Antiagenic drugs disrupt the VEGF signalet, and this group of drugs is monoclonal antibody. It's bevacizumab, sorafenib, sutininib, pasonapabib, and you see that still effect through nucleus 2 through NOS synthetase and nucleus factors 2 transcription factors activation, CREB, CRF, and FTAS, and general effects. It can be cell migration, angiogenesis, and survival. Mechanism of metabolites, cardiac effects. Antimetabolitis can be cause of development DNA damage, and other toxic effects can be connected, related with it, reduced NO production, increased ROS RNS formation, increased endothelial thrombogenicity, and through P53 it's going to and directly through RNA damage going to symptoms, cardiotoxicity symptoms. It can be palpitation, chest pain, ST segment deviation, acute coronary syndromes, sinus tachycardia, QT prolongation, arrhythmias, ventricular dysfunction, hypertension, and cardiogenic shock, and rarely cardiac arrest and sudden death. Cardiotoxicity generally. When we talk about this, it's more for which groups it's more characterized. Doxazoxan, ranolazine, ARB and ACA inhibitors, beta blockers, statins, PDE5 inhibitor, exercise. You see majority effect. It's oxidative stress, TOP2B interaction, interstitial fibrosis, angiotensin-induced blockade of NRG1 RB8 pathways, beta-arrestin dependent signaling, lusitrophy, and anti-apoptotic effects. It's cause of cardiotoxicity generally. Now we will talk about list of compounds with their targets and cardiac side effect, and we will talk about main groups. First of all, more cardiotoxic effect in patient, more when we're talking about development in this effect, about cardiotoxic effect. We can talk about antineoplastic agents. It's a group of patients who has treatment of cancer. It's 5-fluorouracil drug, was introduced on market 2000, and mechanism of action DNA cross-linking. Side effects of cardiac function, it can be arrhythmias, myocardial ischemia, heart failures, and mechanism of toxicity, it's XA2 activation leading to cardiac remodeling, electrolyte imbalances. Arsenic trioxide 2002 introducing, mechanism of action with target inhibition of TXNRD1 activation of IKE, BKB, Jun, MAPK3, MAPK1. Side effects of cardiac function is QT prolongation, tachycardia, and mechanism of toxicity IGRZ trafficking inhibition. Bevacizumab, it's monoclonal antibodies, a blocker of VEGF-A, introduced in 2016. Side effects of cardiac function, heart failure, mechanism of toxic disruption of cardiomyocytes, myocyte survival with VEGF signaling inhibition. Bortezomib was presented and introduced in 2003. Mechanism of action, inhibition of PSMB5, PSMB1. Side effects of cardiac function is heart failure, arrhythmia, and mechanism of cardiotoxicity, HRG trafficking inhibition. Cisplatin 1978, DNA cross-linking, arrhythmias, myocardial ischemia, heart failure, mechanism TXA2 activation leading to cardiac remodeling, electrolyte imbalance. Citarabine 1966, mechanism of action with target, DNA intercalation, inhibition of DNA polymerase beta. Side effects of cardiac function is bradycardia, heart failure, ischemia, mechanism unknown. Daunorubicin 1980, inhibition of TOP2B, arrhythmias, heart failure, side effects of cardiac function, mitochondrial toxicity, oxidative stress leading and apoptosis as mechanism of cardiotoxicity. Dasatinib, introduced on market 2016, mechanism of action BCR-ABL kinase PHI2 LCK YES1, side effects of cardiac function, heart failure, mechanism of toxicity, disruption of cardiomyocyte survival via VEGF signaling inhibition. Docetaxel 1991, inhibition of beta subunit of tubulin BCL2, mechanism of action with target. Side effects of cardiac function is arrhythmias, heart failure, mechanism of cardiotoxicity, mitochondrial toxicity, oxidative stress leading to apoptosis, and apoptosis of cardiac endothelial cell. Doxorubicin 1978, DNA intercalation, inhibition of TOP2B, arrhythmias, heart failure, side effects of cardiac function, mitochondrial toxicity, oxidative stress leading to apoptosis. Idarubicin 1982, inhibition of TOP2B, arrhythmias, heart failures, mitochondrial toxicity, oxidative stress leading to apoptosis, mechanism of toxicity. Imatinib 2016, present on market, mechanism of action BCR-ABL kinase KIT RET, side effects of cardiac function, systolic heart failure, left ventricular dysfunction, release of BC2 proteins leading to mitochondrial toxicity, oxidative stress leading to apoptosis, disruption of cardiomyocyte survival via VEGF signaling inhibition. Lapatinib, introduced and withdrawn 2004, mechanism of action with target blocking of EGFR ICR2, side effects of cardiac function, left ventricular ejection fraction, and congestive heart failure, mechanism of cardiac toxicity, disruption cardiomyocyte survival via EGF signaling inhibition. Niatinib 2005, inhibition of ABL1, blocking of KIT, myocardial ischemia, disruption of cardiomyocyte survival via VEGF signaling inhibition. Nivolumab 2017, inhibition of PD-1, lethal myocarditis, mechanism unknown. Paclitaxel 2095, mechanism of action with target, inhibition of beta subunit of tubulin BCL2, side effects of cardiac function, bradycardia, myocardial ischemia, heart failure, apoptosis of cardiac endothelial cells as mechanism of cardiac toxicity, romidepsin 2009, inhibition of HDS1, HDS2, HDS4, HDS6, ABCC1, QT prolongation, myocardial myocardial infarction can be as adverse effect, side effect of cardiac function. Mechanism of cardiac toxicity, ITRG trafficking inhibition. Cardiotoxicity of monoclonal antibodies. Monoclonal antibodies, identical to antibodies produced by the immune system, specifically bind and extracellular and cell surface proteins, activated cellular apoptosis, and blocking tumor proliferation. The other effects of this class of agents are primarily linked to their targets. HER2 inhibition by monoclonal antibodies is principally associated with cardiac dysfunction. For example, trastuzumab, a vascular endothelial growth factor VEGF-A inhibitor, is also known to downregulate neuroregulin-1, a signaling molecule in cardiac homeostasis and development. Its most common side effect is hypertension, but myocardial infarction may also occur. Bevacizumab, another monoclonal antibody, also negatively affects the coagulation system, probably because of its VEGF inhibition effects. When we talk about antibody, antifibroblastic agents, we're talking about sorafenib, sunitinib, and trastuzumab. Sorafenib is side effects, cardiac function, heart failure, myocardial ischemia, QT prolongation, mechanism of cardiotoxicity, disruption of cardiomyocyte survival via VEGF signaling inhibition. Sunitinib 2006 was presented on market, and side effects of cardiac functions, long QT, left ejection fraction, myocardial infarction. Mechanism of cardiotoxicity, disruption of cardiomyocyte survival via VEGF signaling inhibition, disruption of stress response via PDGF signaling inhibition, disruption of energy homeostasis and mitochondrial fusion-fission system via inhibition of AMPK signaling. Trastuzumab, blocker of ITR2, side effect of cardiac function can be heart failure, tachycardia, and mechanism of cardiotoxicity, disruption of cardiomyocyte survival via AGF signaling inhibition. Anti-inflammatory agents, this group everybody know from medical doctors, pharmacists, pharmaceutical industry. It's diclofenac. Side effect of cardiac function can be myocardial infarction, blocking prostacyclin synthase. Etaraxib was withdrawn 2007, inhibition of COX-2 thrombotic events, blocking prostacyclin synthase. Ibuprofen, inhibition of COX-1, COX-2, myocardial infarction, hypertension, blocking prostacyclin synthase. Indomethacin, myocardial infarction, blocking prostacyclin synthase. Naproxen, myocardial infarction, blocking prostacyclin synthase, and rofecoxib was withdrawn 2004, inhibition of COX-2, myocardial infarction as a side effect of cardiac function. A mechanism of cardiotoxicity is blocking prostacyclin synthase. Central nervous system agents and cardiotoxicity. Benfluorex was withdrawn in 2009, blocking of 5-HT2B receptor and side effect of cardiac function, valvular heart disease. Mechanism of cardiac toxicity, HTR2B induced activation of tumor growth factor beta signaling. Bupivacaine inhibition of CNS9A, ventricular arrhythmias, myocardial and depression. Mechanism of cardiac toxicity, inhibition of voltage-gated sodium channel, mitochondrial toxicity. Clozapine, myocarditis, cardiomyopathy can be as a side effects of cardiac function. Mechanism of cardiac toxicity unknown. Haloperidol can be cause of QT prolongation, torsades arrhythmias and sudden cardiac death. Inhibition of IKR, INA, ICAL. Lidocaine can be cause of bradycardia, cardiac arrest, and mechanism of cardiotoxicity. Inhibition on voltage-gated sodium channel, mitochondrial toxicity. Metasergit, valvular heart disease. Induction of fibrosis via HTR2B induced activation of tumor growth factor B signaling. Pergolide, valvular heart disease, can be as side effects on cardiac. Induction of fibrosis via HTR2 induced activation of tumor growth factor B signaling. Venlafaxine, QT prolongation arrhythmias, inhibition of INA. Anti-gastrointestinal agents in anti-allergic agents. Anti-gastrointestinal, it's thiazaprid drug, can be cause of ventricular arrhythmia, QT prolongation, torsades arrhythmias, cardiac arrest. Inhibition of IKR. Loperamide, cardiac arrest, QT prolongation, ventricular tachycardia, torsades. Inhibition of voltage-gated calcium channels. Omeprazole, inhibition of ATP4A. Acute myocardial infarction can be at heart failure. Disruption of NO synthesis via IDMA production. Anti-allergic agents, plus if you remember, blocker of proton pump can be cause of hypomagnesemia, magnesium, and if this condition not will be interrupted while you will not stop it, administrate this drug. And no drugs of magnesium will not will give recovery for patient if this patient have been administered pump, blocker of pump. It's like omeprazole, MS, and you still remember it. Anti-allergic agents. Diphenylhydramine can be cause of QT prolongation, inhibition of IKR. Interesting group of anti-infective drugs and antibiotic, antiviral and drug. For example, azidotimidine can be cause of dilated cardiomyopathy, mitochondrial toxicity. Azithromycin drug very wide administered in patients with its macrolide. Side effects of cardiac function, QT prolongation, torsades arrhythmia, cardiac death, mitochondrial toxicity, mechanism of cardiac toxicity, Clarithromycin, pay attention to. QT prolongation, myocardial infarction, arrhythmias, cardiac death, mitochondrial toxicity. Erythromycin, old one, macrolide, QT prolongation, ventricular tachycardia, torso de point, ventricular fibrillation. Even can be very careful, be with a patient with cardiac pathology, plus it's patients, older patients with ischemia of myocardium, mitochondrial toxicity. Generally, when we're talking about mitochondrial toxicity, you still remember about typical pathological process, and it can be when in base, lead down, ischemia, tissue hypoxia, in diabetes mellitus, hypertension, and endothelial dysfunction as a result, and it can be myocardial function, stenocardia, and it can be problems with liver, lipid hepatosis of liver, and when you know pathogenesis of this condition, you understand the patient has this typical pathological process, plus it can drug, for example, patient with old patient with ischemia of myocardium, and medical doctor administrate azithromycin. Be careful, because this patient in big risks, has big risk development of torso de point arrhythmia, plus cardiac death can be, for example, clarithromycin, can be even myocardial infarction. Remember please about it. And when we're talking about erythromycin, it can be even ventricular fibrillation. Sofosbuvir, bradycardia, and be careful, for example, in patient with condition, it can be physiological bradycardia in patient who going for sport, and it can just make worse bradycardia. Pentadiene, QT prolongation, arrhythmias, HRG trafficking inhibition. And even we're talking generally about cardiotoxic effect of antibiotics, macrolides which target bacterial protein synthesis. It's effective wide administration in different groups of patients, antibiotics, and you still remember that macrolides such as erythromycin, azithromycin, clarithromycin are considered arrhythmogenic in patient who has risks development arrhythmia. Be careful, because this arrhythmia can torso de point can be even fatal. It has also been shown that macrolides cause mitochondrial toxicity by inhibiting protein synthesis in mitochondria. Fluoroquinolones are another group of antibiotics that can affect HRG and cause torsade de points. Because of this effect, use of fluoroquinolones such as ripofloxacin and sparfloxacin are withdrawn, was discontinued and later withdrawn. Cardiovascular agents, you can say that can be paradoxal, yes, because cardiovascular agents can have cardiotoxicity, but cardiovascular agents paradoxally, the worsening of arrhythmic risk is serious side effects of some antiarrhythmic agents. Several highly protein drugs were lifted from the market or restricted in use because of pro-arrhythmic effects, including dofetilin and encainite. Some non-selective calcium blockers such as lidoflozin and prenelamine were also suspended because of their life-threatening or QT prolongation. This side effect is primarily linked to their higher affinity block of HRG channels and buflomidil and alpha adrenal receptor antagonist withdrawn from the European market due to its unfavorable cardiac safety profile. The selective beta adrenal receptor blocker orciprenaline was removed from the market due to life-threatening cardiac side effects. The cholesterol-lowering agent Propofol, despite associating with QT prolongation and arrhythmias, was discontinued from the United States market due to lack of efficacy against coronary artery disease. Propofol affects HRG trafficking, and it was shown to cause electrophysical abnormalities in neonatal right ventricular cardiomyocytes. The antihypertension drug mifeprintil is another example of a cardiovascular drug removed from the market in 1998 because of safety concerns. Mifeprintil blocks calcium channels and was shown to cause abnormal QT prolongation. Cardiac toxicity manifests as proarrhythmia that represents a new development or a worsening of arrhythmias in patients with or without clinical symptoms, leading to more severe symptoms such as hemodynamic deterioration, syncope, or even sudden death. Manifestation of cardiac toxicity depend not only on higher concentration of drug administration, but also of the types and action of drugs, the pharmacokinetics and underlying heart disease, genetic consideration, and other intervening conditions for drug action. As early recognition of proarrhythmia and avoidance of factors exacerbating the clinical symptoms are mandatory for patient care, a precise understanding of the mechanism and associated condition involved in development of cardiac toxicity is of prime importance. While manifestations of cardiac toxicity have been recognized in clinical cardiology for many years, the first study attracting broad and renewed attention was a report by the Cardiac Arrhythmia Suppression Trial CAS study, which disclosed increased mortality in patients with recent myocardial infarction taking an I+ channel blockers for treatment of ventricular arrhythmias. The exact reason for this increase in mortality resulting from the drugs was not known, but toxic manifestation of Na+ channel blockers in the presence of the ischemic condition were likely to be involved. Since then, many examples of proarrhythmia have been present for antiarrhythmic drugs, as well as for other therapeutic modalities, including both cardiac and non-cardiac drugs. The examples of drug-induced cardiac toxicity include proarrhythmia caused by drug with calcium plus channel blocking property for prolongation and development of torsade points, and by antiarrhythmic drugs of natrium channel blockers and related compounds for worsening arrhythmia and increased cardiac mortality. A detailed understanding of drug-induced cardiac toxicity has resulted from progress in the fields of cardiac electrophysiology and electropharmacology, as well as the clarified caution of molecular mechanisms for inherited arrhythmic disorders, including Long-Covid syndrome and Brugada syndrome. Drug target for prolongation, while congenital Long-Covid syndrome (LQTS) demonstrates unique electrophysiological and clinical manifestation, gene mutation, of ion channels as the pathogenesis of the disease, and have had a great impact of the mechanism of prolongation and development of towards the point associated with this use of drugs. The incidence on congenital LQTC is assumed to be approximately 1 on 5,000 population. However, because of law of incomplete penetrance in the mutation carriers, the actual incidence of prolongation in torsades points may be much less than that predicted by the number of gene carriers. Drug induces or prolongated Swiss arrhythmia with proven prolongation torsades points are estimated to compromise approximately 2-3% of all written prescription, and therefore the incidence of drug-induced torsades point must be much higher than torsades points in congenital LQTC. Quinidine is probably the first example of agent recognized as induced of QT prolongation and proarrhythmia. Soon after its clinical introduction, quinidine was associated with syncope, although there was no delineation or precise measure of the effect. Later, syncope was proved to be caused by a pulse-dependent ventricular tachyarrhythmia not recognized at torsades points. Quinidine was then shown to be a potent blocker of the delayed outwards Kalium plus current, especially AKR, is known to be encoded by one of the etiological genes of LQTC, gene HRG, KSNH2, and HRG has also been shown to be a target for the Kalium plus channel blocking drugs. While many existing and newly developed antiarrhythmic drugs prolongs the QT interval because of the higher affinity binding to the HRG channel. Various cardiac and non-cardiac drugs have also been demonstrated to affect the HRG IKR channel. It is now evident that diverse types of drugs with different chemical structures and pharmacological profiles affected the HRG-IKR channel, causing QT prolongation and development of torsades point as a manifestation of drug toxicity. The reason why many drugs bind with higher affinity to HRG as compared to other Kalium plus channel has recently been clarified. HRG is primary performance subunit with 6 transmembrane spanning regions composing heteromeric assembly with accessory subunit. The drug-binded sites are mainly located on the S6 region of the main subunit. Key features of the HRG channel protein, absent in other KPU channels, seem to underlie the basis of inhibition by many structurally unrelated drugs. The HRG protein slugs proline groups within the lack of profile groups is assumed to facilitate access of drug to the pore region from the intracellular side of the channel to block the channel currently. 2 aromatic residues and located in the central cavity of the channel are thought to provide high affinity drug-binded site. 2 aromatic residues are lacking in other Kalium channels in similar pore regions. The accessory subunit also determines the drug sensitivity. Drug binding to the HRG channel develops in state-dependent manner similar to natrium plus channel block binding to the natrium channel plus channel. Drugs bind to the channel at open and or inactivated chain states and dissociate mainly from rested state. If drugs with AKR blocking properties display state-dependent affinity to the channel, tachycardia is expected to promote binding of the drugs, causing stronger inhibition of AKR. Conversely, bradycardia would cause less inhibition when the effects of the kalium plus channel blockers on action potential and duration were examined. These drugs demonstrated a prominent and prolongation IT, a slow heart rate, and at least action RT, a fast rate. The effects were attributed to reverse use dependence of the blocking action, which is thought to be a major cause of arrhythmia of toxicity by their drugs. However, since the kalium plus channel blockers have been shown to inhibit IKR in a use-dependent manner, and tachycardia activates another kalium plus current, IKS to shorten the IPD reverse use dependence is not a major mechanism of action for these drugs of the IKR channels itself, but is due to combined manifestation with other current activation and rapid rates. Cardiac toxicity of anti-diabetic drugs. A negative effect of anti-diabetic drugs is their increased risk of heart failure, which has been confirmed in different studies. Considering such a risk, the European Medicine Agency EMA and FDA Food Drug Administration issued restriction in 2009 for different drugs containing rosiglitazone and thiazolidinedione class anti-diabetic drugs. After thorough examination of large clinical trials, the FDA removes those restrictions and eliminates the risk evaluation and mitigation strategy for rosiglitazone. Concerns regarding the safety of saxagliptin and allagliptin were also raised. You see reference, my dear friends, my dear colleagues, and if you want a full list of reference for every my lectures I can provide you, you can use in your scientific and your practical activities. It can be useful for postgraduate education students, for medical students, for pharmacological students, for colleagues who would like to have scientific background, and I think that these lectures for toxicity I will continue, and I will be thankful for your topics what can be interesting for you personally, because when I talking with my colleagues in LinkedIn and Facebook, we discuss it practical cases, and very interesting. For example, I talking about it in every my lectures that it can be very useful for practitioner. Plus, for pharmaceutical industry, pharmacovigilance specialist, medical writing specialist, medical information specialist, writing 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8 modules, and risk management plans for Europe and CIS country, Ukraine, and risk mitigation REMS for example, United States, and interesting to investigate it too, because I think this information will be useful and for clinicists, for medical doctors, for healthcare professionals too. I think that if we will combine our efforts, and we will get success, because general our aim is safety patients, and we will do everything. We will do all best for it. Please subscribe my colleagues on my channel, and I will be thankful for your likes and for your comments and for your questions. See you later on my first lectures. Good luck and God bless you.